and Congressman Will Hurd, Republican of Texas. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will. It's always a pleasure to be on.
Are you comfortable with the way the President of the United States is portraying the FBI and the Justice Department? You saw his tweet this morning saying the top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department have politicized the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats and against Republicans. Does that make you comfortable?
Well, I don't have any evidence to suggest that this was politicized on purpose. I do have questions that were outlined in the memo about how the FBI and DOJ provide information at the FISC court. But I do believe that also in that tweet, President Trump mentioned that he supports the rank and file men and women of the FBI. To me, this memo was not about attacking the Mueller investigation. The Mueller investigation should be allowed to continue. Every stone, Bob Mueller should be able to turn over every stone, follow every lead to make sure that we understand what the Russians tried to do in our elections. And this also doesn't repudiate the rank and file member of the FBI. Wolf, as you know, I spent almost a decade as an undercover officer in the CIA. I served shoulder to shoulder with some real patriots in the FBI. And our country is a lot safer because of them. But this ultimately, for me,
yeah, well, that's why I was surprised, because I know you, Congressman. I know you served as a clandestine officer in the CIA. You understand the importance of the U.S. intelligence community in protecting America's national security. So when the Justice Department and the FBI, they say releasing this memo would be extraordinarily reckless, that it could undermine sources and methods, that it could weaken America's ability to get cooperation from friendly foreign governments, friendly foreign intelligence services, and they write a formal letter to the Congress asking them, don't do this. You're comfortable with that?
I am, because I spent most of my adult life determining the difference between intelligence and information. And ultimately, in this 4-page memo, there was no information that hasn't already been out for public consumption. All of this information has been talked about within the press. It's been talked about by others in government. So I'm sure you read the memo, Wolf. The only thing that may have been new was that a specific newspaper article was used in corroboration for one of the FISA applications.
All right. So if you don't think that there was any new information released in this, why did you vote to block the release of the Democratic memo?
Right. Because there were some references to source information for ongoing operations. And so
but let me just stop you for a second, Congressman. Both of these memos had to be reviewed by the President of the United States and his national security team. Both of them had 5 days to be reviewed by the President. You only sent over the Republican majority memo to the President. You failed to send over the Democratic memo. Why?
Because very simply, there was no information that was going to impact national security.
But you weren't sure about that. You didn't know that on the Republican memo. You were worried that there might have to be some redacted portions of that memo. You wanted to see what the Director of National Intelligence would do, presumably.
No,
wanted to see what the President would do.
We were following the process. We were following the process.
Why didn't you follow that process and release the memos simultaneously, which has been the practice of the House Intelligence Committee for 30 or 40 years?
Because there was one memo was ready to go and this other one's not, but hopefully as potentially as early as Monday, we will see we will move forward on the Dem memo as well. I think it's important.
But Adam Schiff says his memo, the minority memo, was ready to go to the White House just like the Republican memo.
I would disagree with that characterization because, again, in my experience, there was a few points that actually would reveal ongoing operations that would have impact on intelligence equities.
Well, you make a fair point if that's true, but let me point out, what would have been the big deal, Congressman, if you would have waited a week, cleaned up, scrubbed the Democratic memo, sent them both over simultaneously to the White House, and let both of them be released at the same time? Why did you have to get this memo out today, and then maybe or maybe not the Democratic memo would eventually be released a week from now, 2 weeks from now, or maybe never?
I don't think it's a few weeks from now or not. The Democratic memo is going to be released. I also don't believe there's anything in this Republican memo that's explosive.
Well, the president says it's a disgrace. The president says it's awful.
That's the president.
He says it's damage. It does damage to the United States. You heard the president, what he said in the Oval Office this morning.
Well, that's his opinion. I know many of my other colleagues. You know, I'm not shocked that members of Congress use hyperbole and over-exaggerate. But for me, this is about being focused on what kinds of information can be presented at a Title III court in order to do something as extraordinary as get a warrant to do a telephone tap or something like that to an American citizen. And for me, my responsibility as a representative is to represent the people that sent me up here to Washington, D.C. And it's never, you know, doing that oversight function, we have to do it even if it's an inopportune political time.
And once again, let me remind our viewers, you were a clandestine CIA officer. You understand the real-world impacts of releasing classified information. I guess a lot of people are wondering whether the Republican majority in the House of Representatives is throwing the intelligence community under the bus.
I don't believe that at all. I think the intelligence community, federal law enforcement, has to be held to a high standard. Every T has to be crossed. Every I has to be dotted. And so I'm a strong supporter of the intelligence community and federal law enforcement, but nobody is above oversight. Nobody is above the law. And we have to make sure that we're holding our leaders accountable to these issues. And this is where I would agree with the gentleman from Arizona. I have a little different take on it, though. We are allowing the Russians to win. The Russians' involvement in our elections was to erode trust in our democratic institutions. And when the press criticizes Congress for providing, transparency on what's happening inside the government, when Republicans and Democrats can't agree on things because it was originated from the other side, when there's this lack of trust between the executive branch and the legislative branch, it creates problems and it allows this erosion of trust. And the only way to get that back is to try to work together, to be thoughtful, and to make sure that we're providing as much transparency as possible.
So clearly you totally disagree with the Republican who's the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, who begged the White House, don't do this. The Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, who's a Republican, he also begged the White House, don't do this. The FBI made a public statement, pretty extraordinary statement, saying, as expressed during our initial review, we have grave, use the word grave concerns about material omissions of fact that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy. Have you read all of the supporting information, the transcripts of the interviews, and gone through the basic raw intelligence that created this memo?
I've been through a lot of it. I haven't been through all of it. I've participated in interviews asking people that were involved in all of this and producing it, asking them the questions about the use of this information. So I feel comfortable that I have a good enough understanding of what's going on to make the decisions that I did make. And look, you allude to the leadership of the FBI and DOJ. I appreciate their perspective. I think they also don't want Congress exercising an aggressive oversight and informing function over their activities, but it's our responsibility to do that. The checks and balances of our government work because we're willing to execute them.
Congressman, one last question, and you've been generous with your time. This is the first time they have really gone public and explained in a which is normally very classified, how the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court works, how it operates, what's needed to get a surveillance warrant on an American citizen here in the United States. All of that has always been, and as you well know this as a former CIA official, all of that has been among the most closely held information. Bottom line, are you comfortable that this information has now been made public?
I am, because a lot of the process that goes into a FISC court or a Title III court is open, it's out there, and how that process is supposed to work. You know, standards of evidence is out there. What constitutes intelligence versus information? That information is out there. What really is held is, you know, the actual data that is used for those types of applications. And again, in this case, there was nothing in this 4-page memo that hadn't already gotten out in some form or fashion into the press and into the public domain.
Congressman Will Hurd, thanks once again for your time. I'm still not, I still don't understand why you couldn't release both the majority and the minority memos, send them over to the White House at the same time, but that's something you're going to have to live with right now. We'll see what happens to that Democratic minority version when, if ever, the president approves it. He's got to sign off on it right now, and we'll see if it does, because it clearly undermines a lot of what the majority, your version, the Republican version, has concluded, but we'll see what they do.
That's your assumption about what's in the memo.
Well, that's Adam
you know,
Schiff. That's Adam Schiff. That's what Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on your committee, says. He and Trey Gowdy are the only two members of your committee who've had access to all of the information. They've gone through it all, point by point by point. Unfortunately, the other members, like you, have not been allowed to go through it.
Yeah, but also, Wolf, we have access to the people that created those documents and been able to make that assumption, right? I don't have to, and I also rely on my experience and background to make these decisions. And when the Democratic memo comes out, y'all can be the judge about whether there was inaccuracies in the Republican memo.
And we'll see once that Democratic memo is released, if it's released, we'll see what they have. That's only fair to take a look, and we'll see. And as you correctly point out, Putin and the Russians, they are very happy right now seeing the dissent that they've helped create by their meddling in the U.S. presidential election. Congressman Will Hurd, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, you got a tough job up there. Thanks so much for joining us.
Have a good weekend, Wolf.
All right, you too. Thank you.